Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Brian King and Christina Benjamin. On July 29, 1993, it was a hot day in Alice County, Texas, USA. Despite the heat, a road crew was working on Cato Road, preparing the ground for asphalt. During their break, one worker leveling gravel spotted something unusual in the thick bushes across the Smith Creek River. The object, approximately 100 meters away, had a grayish color that stood out against the surrounding greenery. Curiosity prompted the worker and a colleague to climb over a barbed wire fence to investigate. About 10 meters from the object, they encountered a foul stench that quickly became unbearable, forcing them to cover their noses with their clothing. Approaching further, they discovered that the object was actually a corpse. It appeared to be a female, likely of school age. The gruesome sight revealed torn flesh covered in flies, and shockingly, the girl's head and arms were missing. The workers quickly notified their supervisor and decided to call the police. Without cell phones and far from the nearest town, one worker stayed behind to guard the scene, while the other went to a nearby town to seek help. Police arrived shortly after being alerted and began examining the scene for evidence and missing body parts. However, a more gruesome discovery awaited them just 300 meters away. The police found another body, a young male, appearing about 15 years old. He was lying face down on the riverbank, roughly 10 meters from a bridge. Unlike the girl, he was fully dressed and had not been dismembered. It seemed he'd been thrown into the river, and the current had washed him ashore. Retrieving his body proved difficult, so the police requested assistance from the city fire department, which used specialized equipment to recover the body. Meanwhile, forensic teams remained on site to investigate and collect evidence before nightfall. The police continued working until sunset, focusing on the area where the bodies were discovered. The medical examiner analyzed the victims and determined that the first body belonged to a teenage girl who had been stabbed multiple times, shot twice in the back with a .22 caliber gun, and decapitated, likely using a large hunting knife or possibly an axe. Her body bore numerous severe wounds on the abdomen, thighs, and genitals, some resembling intricate hieroglyphs carved into the skin. A long, deep cut across her stomach resembled an autopsy incision. The forensic examiner noted extreme cruelty inside the body cavity, including torn intestines and severed hands. Bruises resembling handcuff marks suggested both victims had been restrained for a period before being tortured. Additionally, both of the girl's breasts had been removed. Forensic experts estimated the victims had been dead for approximately 2 days based on their decomposition. The male victim had been shot twice in the head with a similar weapon, but his body showed no signs of beating or struggle. Investigators theorized the attacker severed the girl's arms and head to hinder identification, unaware of advanced DNA identification methods. However, the body's advanced decomposition complicated the identification process significantly. Forensic scientists confirmed the girl had been sexually assaulted, though the high temperatures had caused substantial decomposition, making it challenging to determine exact details. Authorities suspected the attacker acted out of intense anger or extreme hatred. Fly larvae present at the scene allowed forensic entomologists to accurately establish a timeline, concluding the victims were tortured and killed on the night of July 26–27. The forensic team consulted a forensic entomologist specializing in insect activity on decomposing bodies, corroborating the timeline of death. However, investigators still faced questions regarding the differences between the two victims. The boy's hands and head remained intact, puzzling forensic experts who wondered why his hands weren't severed, as this would have helped conceal his identity. Police speculated the killer assumed the boy's body would drift downstream or remain undiscovered, explaining why it wasn't dismembered, or perhaps the boy's body accidentally fell into the river. Authorities concluded the dismemberment wasn't merely an attempt to mislead investigators, but potentially indicated a more disturbing motive. Many serial killers retain trophies from their crimes, leading police to speculate the girl's head may have become part of such a gruesome collection, especially considering the sadistic nature of the attack. The police's first goal was to find the girl's clothes. During their search, they found a clump of light-colored hair caught in the barbed wire that the workers had crossed. The police believed that this hair might have come from the decapitated victim. Unfortunately, the mutilated body had no identifying marks. However, in the boy's pocket, they found a book subscription card from a town, registered to Brian King. They were able to confirm the details at the library, but it was closed for the night, so they would have to wait until morning. The next morning, the police station received a report about the disappearance of 2 teenagers from a small town, the same one where the library was located. The boy's name was Brian King, and the girl's name was Christina Benjamin. After receiving the report, the police visited the boy's home and showed the wallet they had found to the father who answered the door. He confirmed that it belonged to his 14-year-old son, Brian, who was missing along with his 13-year-old stepdaughter, Christina, who had blonde hair. Days before the incident, around midnight, the children's father was awakened by a suspicious car that honked its horn and drove off. During this time, Brian was sleeping in a tent outside the house, which was unusual for a teenager. The car returned just 10 to 15 minutes later. The father noticed his son talking calmly with the driver and assumed it was one of Brian's friends. He spotted a man with blonde hair in the back seat but couldn't see the driver. Feeling reassured, he went to the bathroom. When he came back, the car and his son were gone. The father thought Brian had gone out with friends and planned to discuss this odd situation with him in the morning, so he went to bed. However, Brian never returned home, and it was later discovered that Christina had also disappeared. The parents started contacting friends and acquaintances of their children, but no one had seen the teenagers. The family had a younger girl who shared a room with Christina. She reported that on the night they disappeared, Brian entered their room and woke up Christina. He mentioned that some cool guys had arrived in a car and invited them to a party. Christina agreed, and they both left home together. Eventually, their parents reported the children missing to the police. They noted that before their disappearance, Christina had injured her foot during a school class. Upon further investigation, it was found that Christina's hair was on the forensic expert's desk. She had light hair, which was compared to strands found on a fence and those collected from home combs. The results showed that the hairs did not match, indicating they could belong to a likely killer, who also appeared to have light hair. With no evidence available, forensic experts had to rely on alternative methods. They discovered fibers on Brian's shoes that matched the material used in the carpets of Japanese cars. Brian's father provided a description of the car he saw, mentioning that it was dark in color. However, his description lacked detail, as he could not recall the specific model or license plate number. The police were particularly puzzled by the brutality that Christina had suffered. If this was not a personal hate crime, it would suggest they were dealing with a very dangerous person who was likely to commit further acts of violence. They speculated that the motive behind such cruelty could have been sexual. After interviewing the friends of the murdered teenagers, the police learned that on the evening of her disappearance, Christina was supposed to meet a man named Jason. All the witnesses who spoke to the police pointed to Jason Massey as the only person capable of committing such a crime. One of his friends revealed that Jason had long ago turned to a darker lifestyle. He had dropped out of school, never held a job, frequently killed animals, and kept their heads as trophies. Jason did not hide his disturbing interests. He once made a chilling comment, expressing enjoyment in saying that if a serial killer were active in the area, it would be him. Although he liked to boast about such things, people generally did not take him seriously. Jason was described as having long, curly blonde hair and was 20 years old at the time of these events. His mother was indifferent towards him, even hiding food in his room. The family frequently moved, faced evictions due to unpaid rent, and often lived in unstable conditions. Jason had a difficult childhood, living in a car and facing a harsh environment. He was addicted to alcohol and drugs, bullied weaker children, and started harming animals. His father was also addicted to drugs and treated him poorly. During Jason's school years, his father was incarcerated for a long time, which had a serious impact on Jason's mental health. Jason was involved in various petty crimes, including stalking. There was an incident where he killed a girl's dog because she rejected his advances, and he continued to stalk her, leaving her extremely frightened. As a child, Jason loved his younger brother, but grew to hate adults. As an adult, his feelings toward women became entwined with violent fantasies. He also believed in ghosts and thought he could hear them speaking to him, influenced by religious stories told to him by his devout grandmother. The year the two teenagers were murdered, he was sentenced to 12 months in prison after a police officer discovered a dead cat and some suspicious cutting tools in his car. Unfortunately, he was released early and never faced the consequences of his actions. Police reported that when Jason was arrested, he was wearing handcuffs and appeared to be enjoying the situation. Jason did not resist arrest and confidently stated that he would be released soon. After searching his home, police found numerous newspaper clippings about the murders, a collection of adult videos, a box filled with handcuffs, and knives that had traces of blood. His room also contained books on satanic themes. In Jason's car, a brown 1982 Subaru, forensic experts discovered what appeared to be bloodstains, particularly concentrated in the trunk. They also found duct tape with light hair that did not belong to Jason, a receipt for ammunition, a hunting knife, and a brown carpet with fibers matching those found at the crime scene. During questioning, Jason denied any involvement in the crimes. He claimed to know where the severed body parts were, and even offered to lead the police to them. They searched the forest together for several hours, but found nothing. After returning to the station, Jason requested a lawyer and stopped cooperating with the police. Soon after, the police received an anonymous tip suggesting that Jason was the only one who could be responsible for the teenagers' massacre. Later, a witness emerged who had spent much of the evening of July 26 with Jason. She stated that he had left home acting strangely aggressive, likely due to drug use. She noticed he had handcuffs and a gun, which made her uneasy, but she didn't report it to the police because she was afraid of him. The girl later said that Jason owned a .22 caliber pistol, the same type used to shoot Brian and Christina, and that he had purchased ammunition shortly before killing the two children. DNA evidence from blood and hair found in his car matched the victims. Police gathered more and more circumstantial evidence linking Jason to the massacre, while he had no alibi. That evening, his friends and acquaintances found him strange, and some even felt afraid of him. A teacher from the school Jason attended said he was fixated on disturbing images, including satanic symbols. He often spoke about murders, which frightened some of his classmates. At that point, there was no solid evidence against him. To establish Jason's connection, the FBI was called in to create a criminal profile using photographs from the crime scene. During the investigation, it was discovered that Jason's mother had found several of his notebooks the previous June. These notebooks contained disturbing content, including a list of girls Jason wanted to kill, with detailed descriptions of the violent acts he fantasized about. Christina was at the top of the list. The alarming nature of the diaries prompted Jason's mother to seek help from a psychotherapy clinic after reading them. A psychiatrist assessed Jason and concluded that he posed a danger to himself and society, leading to his admission for intensive care and further observation. However, not all medical professionals agreed with the diagnosis of antisocial personality disorder. Most doctors, after conducting evaluations, opposed this diagnosis, resulting in Jason's release from the clinic without further treatment. Jason's writings became crucial evidence in the case, as they showed his obsession with thoughts of murder and torture directed at young girls for several years. He claimed that his desire to kill was motivated purely by sexual arousal. On March 17, 1994, Jason was charged with 2 counts of premeditated murder, yet he maintained his innocence. 3 weeks after the charges were filed, the hearings commenced. The prosecutor's office intended to pursue the death penalty for the defendant, which is permitted under Texas law. The hearing started on September 28, 1994. The prosecution alleged that in mid-July 1993, Jason confided in a friend that he had obtained ammunition, knives, and handcuffs, and that he had devised a plan to kidnap Christina from her home. He involved Brian to entice both teenagers into a car, claiming they were going to a party. Once inside, he quickly disposed of the boy and shot him in the car. Christina attempted to flee, but he injured her, caught her, and proceeded to torment her. The prosecution worried that Jason could evade justice since the public defender argued that the investigation was biased. The police focused solely on Jason as a suspect after hearing about a mysterious individual, neglecting to consider other possibilities. The defense lawyer pointed out to the jury that the evidence and assumptions made by the prosecution warranted further investigation. Jason's sister testified during the trial, sharing details about their challenging childhood. They often attended school unwashed, beaten, and hungry. As a result, Jason struggled to focus on his studies despite his efforts. However, her testimony backfired when the prosecution pointed out that, despite their hardships, his sister managed to lead a decent life without resorting to violence. This was argued as a reason why Jason's background could not justify his cruel actions. The prosecution's team included a forensic expert and a forensic entomologist, who provided a thorough report on Christina's autopsy and the severe injuries she endured. Their findings indicated a brutal and unrestrained act of violence, suggesting that allowing Jason to leave the courtroom would be a grave injustice. One of the witnesses for the prosecution was Chris Nowlin, the same friend who was driving the car that transported the teenagers from their home. He chose to cooperate with the prosecution by testifying against Jason in exchange for immunity from criminal charges related to his involvement. Jason convinced his friend Chris to meet his girlfriend, claiming that he had been dating Christina since high school. When they reached a secluded area near a bridge, Jason revealed his dark intentions to Chris. He planned to take Christina and Brian into the woods, kill them, and assault the girl. Chris dismissed Jason's words, as he often joked about such things and never acted them out. Jason's former classmate testified that he had been stalking Christina for an extended period. After she rejected his advances in 7th grade, he killed her dog out of revenge and used its blood to stain her parents' car. The stalker also sent her disturbing photos of decapitated women, claiming this was how she would end up. A gun store salesman confirmed that he sold ammunition to Jason, which was later matched to the ammunition used in the murders. The day after the crime, Jason went to a car wash to clean his vehicle, but forensic experts discovered important evidence there. According to Jason's mother, he had joined a religious community shortly before the massacre, and she believed he was genuinely trying to change his ways. However, diary entries presented in court painted a different picture, revealing that he was actually planning the crime. On the day of the hearing, a tourist exploring the woods near where the teenagers were found murdered stumbled upon an old, rusty refrigerator. Curious, he approached it and opened the door, horrified to discover 30 animal skulls inside. He also found 4 red and yellow skulls in plastic bags. The skulls were accompanied by diaries written in strange, messy handwriting titled The Book of Murders. The diaries, which began in 1989 and ended on the day of the 1993 murders of Christina and Brian, detailed his grisly experiments with animals and outlined his plans for Christina, which he subsequently carried out exactly as described. He had previously attempted to commit murder but had failed, which frustrated him. His violent urges were partly driven by his hatred for his mother and a desire to kill her. Additionally, his grandmother often told him stories about demons, which may have influenced his thoughts. This evidence led the prosecutor's office to conclude that Christina's murder was premeditated. In his diaries, Jason described himself as a killing machine. After both the prosecution and defense delivered their closing statements, the jury began deliberating the verdict. After 3 hours, they found Jason Massey guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder. The next step was to evaluate the aggravating and mitigating circumstances to determine whether the death penalty was appropriate. The prosecution presented evidence from Jason's own diary, which detailed his gruesome actions, including the murders of 4 cats, 7 dogs, and numerous calves. He had a disturbing obsession with collecting animal heads as trophies. Testimonies from a few of Jason's friends revealed that he viewed acts of cruelty as a display of power and wanted to showcase them. The diary entries also indicated that he had no intention of stopping his violent behavior. One of his last entries expressed a desire to become the most notorious serial killer in the United States, claiming that he planned to kill over the next 20 years. It took the jury just 15 minutes to decide on the death penalty for Jason Massey on October 12, 1994. After the verdict was announced, the judge stated that executing Jason was a more humane option than what he had done to his victims. When Jason was taken to death row, he claimed that he had placed Christina's hands and head in a pillowcase along with her clothes and thrown them into the river. However, police were skeptical of his account, as he often kept trophies from his crimes. Jason was shocked by the conviction. He was determined to fight the verdict, so his lawyer filed an appeal on his behalf. Many advocates, including a Canadian coalition against the death penalty, spoke out in his support. Human rights advocates argued that the death penalty was inhumane and criticized the investigation, claiming that it had been poorly conducted and ignored other potential suspects who were in the car during the kidnapping of Christina and Brian. Despite their efforts, their actions were ultimately in vain. On the evening of April 3, 2001, Jason was led to the execution chamber. For his last meal, he chose chicken legs, fried pumpkin, fried eggplant, mashed potatoes, green peas, boiled cabbage, corn, spinach with cheese, caramel fudge, pecans, ice cream, and a pot of sweet tea. Before his execution, Jason spoke to the victims' families, expressing his remorse for his actions.